This is really going to hurt you, darling. I'm sorry, but I've fallen in love with another man, and I'm leaving you to be with him." She ruined a perfectly good evening. It was the first warm, clear evening since springtime, with a sky as clear as crystal, cold beer in hand and all errands completed. I was hoping to sit outside, watch the sunset, admire the stars, drink a cool beer, and enjoy the love of my life. I even imagined pulling her into the house, making love to her for hours, and then falling asleep in a sweaty, sticky mess of sheets. The beer tasted good, with a slight hop that paired well with the beautiful March evening. "You didn't do anything, darling. I just fell in love with a younger man. I guess I'm lucky to have the charm to attract someone with the youthful frenzy and sexual stamina I once enjoyed with you." Tonight Mars was supposed to be visible to the left and slightly down from the sun as it touched the horizon in the west. That would have been a sight to see. After all these years together, she wasn't taking anything from home, except her clothes and personal belongings. She hoped I would keep her family heirlooms and pass them on to the kids someday. Johnny, the new man in her life, didn't have room for those things in his small house. She planned to take most of our joint savings so she and Johnny could start living together. He hadn't finished college yet, so she'd have to support both of them for a while. She thought this was a fair settlement for our divorce. She handed me the divorce papers, asking me to read them all the way through. She mentioned that our attorney, Rai, insisted on the terms being final, with no backing out once signed. His cute assistant was there to notarize the documents quickly. Artie, our attorney, assured her that the divorce would be final in a month or two, but we could start living as single people right away. The sky was beautiful. Eagles soared majestically above, and I knew there was a pair nesting by the river in the valley. Eagles choose their mates for life. I wished I could be one of them, flying around the sun with my true love. But here I was, about to sign away my marriage. Artie had sent me a letter, asking me to read it before signing the documents. In the letter he apologized for taking her case, explaining that legally he had to represent her since she came to him first. He confessed that her story was bizarre, and she was insistent that he be the one to represent us both. As a lifelong friend, he pushed her into an agreement that was in my best interest, even though he couldn't warn me beforehand. Artie promised that I didn't even need to read the agreement, just sign it where the pink arrows indicated. After I signed, I could laugh in peace at how favorable the terms were for me. I signed the agreement, and she thanked me, acknowledging that this was a complete surprise. She originally planned to stay with me for one last night, to say goodbye in a way that honored our 20 years together. Johnny thought it would be foolish not to kiss me goodbye, but she left it up to me how we'd spend our first night unmarried. Jen, Artie's assistant, came into the room and winked at me. She was gorgeous, smart, with a keen legal mind and a tan that highlighted her silky smooth legs. I suddenly realized she might actually stay with me that night, influenced by the months of flirtation in Artie's office. As she leaned over the desk to put her official stamp next to my signature, her blouse clung to her, revealing her curves. I couldn't resist the thought of her warming my bed that night. Meanwhile, my wife was pestering me for an answer, but I couldn't utter a word. Jen suggested she should leave, offering to stay and make sure I was okay. Mars was visible now, a harbinger of war, as the stars began to show and the sun turned red before retiring into the night. My wife turned to leave but rushed back, insisting on one last kiss and hug. I didn't turn around. The sky was putting on a show just for me, and it would be rude to interrupt it. Jen stepped in between us, reminding her that I didn't want to make a scene. She urged her to go to her new man and start her new life. My wife hesitated, sobbing as she realized I wasn't going to fight for her. Jen reassured her, saying I wanted her to leave and be happy, just as she wanted. I heard the car pull away and the front door lock clicked. It was quiet, except for Jen's soft footsteps. She wrapped her arms around me, pulling the plaid over both of us, and kissed my neck. Her warmth was intoxicating, and I realized she was naked. As Jen unbuttoned my shirt, I felt the tension melt away. She whispered that I was the luckiest man alive. If I had served my wife with the divorce papers last night, I would have given her half of everything. Instead, she came to me on her own, asking for a simple divorce. We both recognized each other's independence as soon as she left. Jen's hands made me feel beautiful as she led me to the table behind her. She had been flirting with me for months, and now we were here naked in my house. It was time to stop playing games. We danced, we sang, and when she was tired, I carried her to my bed. We danced some more before sleep took us. The next morning, I woke up alone with a note on my dresser. Jen had left, saying she wasn't comfortable sleeping with someone all night. She hoped to find a guy like me to settle down with, or maybe I'd still be single when she was ready. I finally read the divorce agreement Artie had prepared. I grinned as I realized I had kept everything: the house, cars, furniture, art, bank accounts, investments, my pension, and 100% of my paycheck, no alimony. My ex-wife had left her keys and wedding rings on the dresser, disappearing from my life. At 4 p.m. That same day, I got a call from the hospital. My ex-wife had been badly beaten by her boyfriend. I gave them our insurance information and called the kids and her relatives to let them know. They were horrified, more by her betrayal than her trauma. Despite their shock, they begged me not to leave her alone in the hospital. I went to see her, ensuring I was in the room when the doctor came in. I arranged for her discharge and took care of all her needs during recovery. I packed up her things from her new accommodation and brought them back to my house. I didn't kiss her, didn't fawn over her, and certainly didn't discuss what she had done or our future. She stayed in my house in the living room as I turned it into her temporary bedroom. There was no full bath on the first floor, so I had to see her more often than I expected. I did my job well, taking care of her, even her most intimate needs. Our children visited, but then went back to college, leaving me to care for their mother alone. Her parents never showed up, citing the cold weather as a reason. Throughout her recovery, she never thanked me, never apologized, and never acknowledged the choice she had made. I began to see her as a burden, a cannonball on my leg. I had loved her deeply, but her betrayal had destroyed that love. Each step in her healing process was a step toward my freedom. When the cast was removed from her arm, I no longer needed to feed her. When the cast on her ankle was removed, she could transfer to a wheelchair on her own, freeing me from the humiliation of caring for her most intimate needs. She made a comment about returning to the master bedroom, but I quickly shut that down. No, that's not going to happen, I told her. I wanted to vacate the living room, and she could move into the guest bedroom. She had signed away her rights to our home, and I reminded her of that. I also explained that our divorce had been finalized 2 weeks ago. She hadn't received the judgment because her mail was being forwarded to another address. Her head dropped as I gently reminded her that she had given up her family, her home, and the love of a devoted husband. I told her I needed her to move out so I could finally mourn the death of our marriage and move on with my life. For the next 2 weeks she tried to talk to me, but I politely declined. Eventually she had the cast removed from her other leg. She had friends who helped her, and she managed to get a haircut and manicure. Finally, the night before she was to move out, she asked to talk to me one last time. She told me about her grief, how she had been seduced by the attention of a young man who lacked worldly common sense. She confessed that she had been wrong at every turn, and she hoped I could someday forgive her. She had found a small furnished apartment, and planned to move in the next day. I allowed her to stay at my house for another month until she was fully recovered. I even went with her when she testified against her lover, who was found guilty of attempted murder and aggravated assault. I handed her the keys to a new townhouse apartment, fully furnished, with a stocked pantry and wine rack. The keychain also had the key to her Audi. I never wanted my wife to get beaten and lose so much of her life. She was still the mother of my children, and I wanted her to be comfortable. The kids were thrilled, but I rebuked them for not helping during our family crisis. I informed them that they would now have to pay their own living expenses and take responsibility for their own lives. My wife's in-laws were easier to deal with. They simply stopped being my in-laws. I made it clear that while I would remain friendly, they were no longer family to me. Artie and I continued to be golf partners and drinking buddies. I often received invitations to dinner with him and his wife, but I never brought Jen. Despite her being an amazing lover, with a great smile and a killer body, she had dumped me within 12 hours of my wife's departure. That made her the embodiment of everything that was wrong. That night my marriage fell apart. I wasn't mean to her. I realized it wasn't her fault. She was guilty only by association. But I was too proud to go back to a woman who had rejected my feelings. So no, there would be no new dance with Jen. I've moved on, but there is still no love in my life. I am like a bee, flying from one flower to another, pollinating many. It's hard work, but someone has to do it. And there are many flowers that need some pollen in their lives. But I can live with that.